A lone figure stood atop the towering cliff, gazing out over the vast expanse of the turbulent sea. Below, the howling wind whipped through their tattered cloak, obscuring their face, and shadow their eyes, burning with a steely resolve. They had come to the edge, to make a choice, a decision that would alter the course of history forever. For years, they had dedicated their life to the fight against the tyrannical regime that had long oppressed their people. Countless battles had been waged, countless lives lost in the struggle, yet still the cruel leaders clung to power, their iron grip tightening with each passing day. The time had come, they knew, to take drastic action, to finally bring an end to the suffering. Drawing a deep breath, the figure stepped forward, plunging into the abyss below, free-falling through the air. They felt a strange sense of peace washing over them. No longer burdened by the weight of their mission, they were at last free. In that moment, all the pain, all the sacrifices, all the struggles faded away. Embracing the tranquility of their last moments, they closed their eyes and let the winds carry them down to the churning waters below. But as they neared the surface, a glint of light caught their eye. Looking up, they saw a massive airship descending rapidly, a shimmering force field surrounding its hull. Their eyes widened as they realized this was no ordinary vessel. It was the flagship of the very regime they had sworn to destroy. A sudden surge of adrenaline coursed through their veins, reigniting the flame of determination within. Gritting their teeth, the figure twisted their body, angling themselves towards the approaching ship. Summoning every ounce of their strength, they flung themselves forward, crashing through the crackling energy barrier and slamming into the metal hull with bone-shattering force. The impact sent shockwaves reverberating through the massive vessel as alarms blared to life. Tumbling across the deck, the figure quickly regained their footing. Drawing a gleaming sword from beneath their cloak, they charged towards the bridge, cutting down any guards that dared to stand in their way. Bursting through the doors, they found the tyrannical leader himself cowering behind a phalanx of armed soldiers. A cruel smile spread across the dictator's face as he beheld the defiant intruder. "You are a fool," he hissed, "to think you could ever hope to defeat me. Your rebellion ends here." The figure responded with a steely glare, gripping their sword tightly. Time to end this, they growled, lunging forward into the fray. The sound of clashing steel and panicked shouts echoed through the bridge as the figure engaged the dictator's soldiers in a desperate battle. Weaving between the onslaught of attackers, they fought with a ferocity born of years of pent-up rage and suffering. Blade flashing, they cut down one foe after another, drawing steadily closer to their true target, the tyrannical leader cowering behind his human shield. But the dictator was no mere coward. He was a cunning strategist, and as the figure pressed their assault, he unleashed a devastating counterattack. Signaling his men, they converged on the intruder from all sides, overwhelming them with sheer numbers. The figure fought valiantly, but the relentless onslaught soon took its toll, and they found themselves battered and exhausted. Sensing victory, the dictator let out a triumphant laugh. "Soon your pathetic rebellion will be crushed," he sneered. "Once I have disposed of you, I will hunt down every last one of your miserable followers and extinguish the flame of their hope forever." The figure glared back, defiantly refusing to show any sign of defeat. "Even if you succeed in killing me," they spat, "the people will rise up against you. They will not rest until your twisted regime has been torn down and your name is erased from history." The dictator's smug expression darkened with rage. "How dare you?" he snarled, lashing out and striking the figure a vicious blow that sent them reeling. "We shall see about that." Staggering backwards, the figure lost their footing and tumbled over the edge of the bridge, plummeting towards the churning waters below. As they fell, they caught a glimpse of the airship's engines flaring to life, the vessel beginning to ascend desperately. They reached out, grasping for any means of salvation, but their fingertips only found empty air. Just as they were about to hit the waves, a sudden blur of motion darted across their vision. A hand clamped down on their wrist, halting their descent. The figure gazed up in stunned disbelief to see a familiar face, their old comrade Jax, hanging precariously over the edge, his muscular frame straining with the effort of holding them aloft. "Jax, what are you doing here?" the figure exclaimed. "You have to get out of here." "I'm not leaving you behind," Jax grunted, his eyes narrowing with determination. "Not this time." With a tremendous heave, he began pulling the figure back up over the railing. Just as the airship's engines reached full power, powerful gusts of wind buffeted them, nearly tearing the figure from Jax's grasp. but the former soldier held firm, refusing to let go until his comrade was safely back on solid ground. As their feet touched down, the figure stared at Jax in stunned silence. Unable to find the words to express their gratitude, they simply clasped his hand in a gesture of deep appreciation. Jax met their gaze and gave a solemn nod, understanding the unspoken message between them. Looking up, the figure watched as the airship vanished into the distance, disappearing over the horizon. The dictator had escaped yet again, but this was not the end, they vowed, clenching their fist, determination burning in their eyes. One day soon they would have their revenge. Jax and the figure made their way through the deserted city streets, the air thick with an uneasy silence. As they walked, the figure glanced around warily, eyes narrowed. They scanned the surrounding buildings and alleyways for any signs of danger. Though the tyrannical dictator had escaped their grasp for now, they knew his reach extended far and wide across the land. They had to be vigilant. Sensing their companions' unease, Jax placed a reassuring hand on their shoulder. "You don't have to worry," he said in a low voice. "I've got your back, just like old times." The figure managed a faint smile, grateful for Jax's steadfast loyalty and support, but their expression quickly darkened as they were reminded of the high price that loyalty had demanded in the past. Too many comrades had fallen in their struggle against the regime, and the figure feared that more sacrifices lay ahead. Sensing the shift in their mood, Jax gave their shoulder a gentle squeeze. "We'll make it through this," he said, his voice soft but resolute. "You and me, just like we always have." Nodding, the figure reached up and squeezed Jax's hand in return. They may have lost the battle today, but the war was far from over. With Jax by their side, they knew they stood a fighting chance of one day toppling the tyrant's reign of terror. As they pressed onward, a sudden movement in the shadows ahead caused them both to freeze and reach for their weapons. But to their surprise, the figure who emerged from the gloom was not an enemy, but a familiar face. "Rachel," the figure exclaimed, their hearts swelling with relief. They had feared the young rebel had perished in the chaos of the initial attack. Rachel's eyes widened as she recognized them, a joyous smile spreading across her face. "You're alive," she cried, rushing forward to embrace the figure. The figure returned the hug, gratefully relieved to see their comrade had survived the onslaught. "Rachel," they said, pulling back to look into her eyes, "I'm so glad you're safe." Rachel nodded, running a hand through her tangled hair. "I was starting to lose hope," she admitted, "but then Jax showed up, and I knew there was still a chance." Jax gave her a reassuring nod. "Then the three of us better start planning our next move," he said, his gaze hardening. "We've got a dictator to take down." The figure and Rachel exchanged a determined look, nodding in agreement. After all this time, the final confrontation was drawing near. They had to be ready. The trio made their way cautiously through the abandoned streets, keeping to the shadows and evading any signs of life. They had heard rumors of a safe haven on the outskirts of the city, a refuge where survivors had gathered to regroup and fortify their defenses. As they neared the designated coordinates, Rachel's pace quickened, her eyes alight with hope. "Maybe this is it," she said. "Maybe we can finally find some real protection." Jax's expression remained skeptical, however, his brow furrowed in apprehension. "I don't know," he murmured. "We should still proceed with caution. There's no telling what kind of group we might be dealing with." The figure nodded in agreement. Recent events had taught them to trust no one. They had been betrayed far too many times to let their guard down so easily. Rounding the corner, they came upon a massive steel barricade guarded by a group of armed sentries. The figure tensed, ready to turn back, when suddenly a voice called out from the watchtower. "Hold your fire," the man shouted. "We've got survivors here. Get the gate." The massive doors creaked open, and the trio cautiously stepped inside, finding themselves in a bustling courtyard surrounded by sturdy concrete buildings. The place was a hive of activity, people moving to and fro, carrying supplies and reinforcing defenses. "Welcome to our little sanctuary," the guard said, approaching them with a friendly smile. "My name's Cole. I'm the leader of this community." The figure eyed him warily, not quite trusting the man's overly affable demeanor. As Cole continued to extol the virtues of their sanctuary, they shared a pointed glance with Jax, their comrade, clearly mirroring their own unease. Sensing their skepticism, Cole raised his hands, palms out. "No need to be so tense," he said with a chuckle. "We're all friends here after the hell we've been through. I think we've more than earned the right to a little safety and security, don't you? The figure arched a brow, remaining silent, while Jax crossed his arms, his gaze narrowing. I suppose we'll be the judge of that, he said evenly. Cole just smiled, unfazed by their reticence. Very well, he said, gesturing for them to follow. Come, let me show you around. As they trailed after him, the figure couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to this supposed safe haven than met the eye. Something about Cole's demeanor and the regimented nature of the community left them uneasy. Perhaps their search for sanctuary had only led them into another trap. The more time they spent in Cole's so-called sanctuary, the more convinced the figure became that this place was anything but a safe haven. Their suspicions had only grown as they observed the tight control Cole maintained over his followers, the unquestioning obedience they displayed, and the unsettling way he seemed to single out certain individuals for special attention. Jax had voiced similar concerns, voicing his belief that Cole was amassing an army of loyal supporters for some nefarious purpose. The figure nodded grimly in agreement, recalling the ruthless tactics employed by the tyrannical dictator they had faced before they could not let history repeat itself. As they waited for an opportunity to confront Cole discreetly, the trio overheard whispered rumors of dark deals being struck between the community's leader and the very creatures they had come here to escape. Apparently, Cole had been making secret arrangements with the mutated zombies in exchange for protection and resources. Horrified, the figure exchanged a stricken look with Jax, and Rachel, trembling with barely suppressed rage. They knew they could no longer remain silent. They had to act before Cole's twisted schemes came to fruition. Cornering the leader in one of the empty corridors, the figure demanded answers. What is the meaning of this? They snarled. You're in league with the undead. Cole's expression darkened as he realized his duplicity had been discovered, his facade of benevolence crumbling. He sneered at them. You fools, he hissed. You have no idea what I have in store. With that, he gestured to a group of armed guards who swarmed in from the shadows. Wildly outnumbered, the trio found themselves surrounded and disarmed at the leader's command. The guards seized them, roughly dragging them towards the exit. No, Rachel cried, struggling against their captors. Where are you taking us? To the perfect testing ground, Cole replied with a malicious grin. You're going to help me demonstrate the true power of my new army. The figure's eyes widened in horror as they realized the full extent of Cole's treachery. He was going to unleash the mutant zombies upon them. Summoning their remaining strength, they redoubled their efforts to break free, but it was no use. As they were hauled out into the open courtyard, the terrible truth became clear. Hordes of the twisted creatures had already gathered, waiting hungrily for their prey. The figure's heart sank as they realized their last desperate gambit had failed. They were trapped. Jax, Rachel, and the figure fought with all their might against the guards, but their captors were numerous and well-trained. They were quickly overpowered and dragged towards the waiting horde of mutant zombies. Cole stood back, observing the proceedings, a smug grin plastered across his face. Soon you'll see the true power of my new army, he boasted. The infected are far superior to the mindless, shambling corpses you're used to fighting. Their speed, strength, and intelligence make them the perfect soldiers. As the trio was shoved into the open, the zombies surged forward, their inhuman howls echoing across the courtyard. Jax pushed Rachel behind him, glaring defiantly at the approaching monsters. We won't go down without a fight, he snarled. The figure stood beside him, fists clenched tightly. You may have the advantage in numbers, Cole, they growled, but we won't make it easy for you. Cole let out a cruel laugh, pathetically predictable. He sneered. You can't possibly hope to defeat them, my dear friends. They are the future, the next step in the evolution of this new world. The zombies were almost upon them now, their twisted features contorted in feral hunger. Jax and the figure braced themselves, ready to sell their lives dearly, when suddenly a thunderous explosion rocked the courtyard. Debris and shrapnel rained down as a massive hole was blown in the perimeter wall. Seizing the opportunity, Jax and the figure broke free of their captors and rushed to Rachel's side. What the hell was that? Jax exclaimed, whirling around to face Cole. The leader's expression had morphed from smug confidence to sheer panic as he stared at the breach in the defenses. Impossible, he stammered. The outer patrols were supposed to prevent any attacks. His words were cut short as a figure emerged from the smoke and rubble, stalking towards them with single-minded determination. It was another mutant zombie, but this one was unlike anything they had seen before. Towering over the normal infected, this creature's muscles rippled beneath its decaying flesh, its eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence. It let out a bone-chilling roar that shook the very ground as it charged straight for Cole. The terrified leader turned and fled desperately as the monster closed in Jax, and the figure watched in stunned silence as the zombie tackled Cole to the ground and began to savage him. In the ensuing chaos, the trio made a break for the breach, making their escape. Just as the other mutants swarmed the courtyard to join the feeding frenzy, they ran as fast as they could away from the horror they had witnessed, their only thought to put as much distance between themselves and that nightmarish place as possible. Jax, Rachel, and the figure raced through the rubble-strewn streets, lungs burning, as they desperately fled the mutant horde that had broken through Cole's vaunted defenses. Glancing back over their shoulders, they were horrified to see the monstrous zombies in hot pursuit, their inhuman howls echoing all around them. They couldn't keep up this pace forever, Jax panted, casting a desperate look at his companions. "We need to find somewhere to hide," he said quickly, their eyes scanning the devastated landscape for any sign of shelter. Rachel's gaze landed on a partially collapsed building up ahead. "A safe house," she cried, pointing towards the structure. "It might still be intact." The trio veered off course, barreling towards the crumbling edifice and ducking inside. Just as the mutants reached the entrance, Jax slammed the door shut behind them, bracing it with a heavy metal beam as the zombies slammed against it from the other side. For a moment, there was only the sound of their ragged breathing as they huddled in the dimly lit interior. Rachel wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "I can't believe this is happening," she whispered, her voice quavering. The figure placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're going to make it through this," they said firmly, "Jax, and I won't let anything happen to you." Jax nodded in agreement, his expression grim. Yet even as he spoke, a dark realization began to dawn on them. All Cole's betrayal had been just the tip of the iceberg. Something much more sinister was at work here, the source of the mutant infection far more complex than any of them had imagined. Just then, the sound of movement from deeper within the building caused them all to stiffen and reach for their weapons, ready to do battle with whatever horrors they might find. But as a lone figure emerged from the shadows, their eyes widened in disbelief. "Cole," the figure breathed in stunned recognition, "you're alive." The disheveled leader stumbled towards them, his clothing in tatters and his face streaked with blood and grime. He fixed them with a manic gaze, a twisted smile spreading across his lips. "That's right," he rasped. "I'm still here, and I have a little surprise for you." Jax stepped forward, putting himself between Cole and the others. "What the hell are you talking about?" he growled suspiciously. Cole let out a chilling laugh, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Oh, you're going to love this," he purred. As he spoke, a low, rumbling sound began to emanate from the floor beneath their feet. The trio exchanged a horrified look, realizing too late that they had walked right into a trap. Jax, Rachel, and the figure braced themselves as the ominous rumbling grew louder, the floor trembling beneath their feet. Glaring at Cole, the figure demanded to know what he had done. The deranged leader's grin widened as he gestured to the shaking ground. "Ah, so glad you asked," he cackled. "You're about to meet my newest and most prized creations." Suddenly, a massive clawed hand burst through the concrete, shattering it like glass, and a nightmarish creature emerged from the gaping hole in the floor. It pulled its massive body, a hulking zombie mutant, unlike anything they had ever seen. Rachel cried out in terror as the monstrosity towered over them, its glowing red eyes fixed on its prey, Jax, and the figure reacted quickly, ushering her behind them and taking up defensive stances. But as the mutant raised its claws to strike, a thunderous explosion rocked the building, sending debris raining down around them. In the chaos, a large chunk of concrete crashed down directly towards Rachel. Without hesitation, Jax shoved her out of the way, taking the full force of the impact on his own body. He crumpled to the ground, a pained grunt escaping his lips as the figure rushed to his side. Rachel stared at him in horror. "Jax, no," she cried, kneeling beside him. The figure quickly checked his injuries, their face etched with worry. "He's alive," they said, "but badly hurt. We have to get him out of here." Cole let out a mocking laugh, oblivious to their plight. "Fools," he sneered. "Did you really think a few measly zombies would be enough to stop me? The true power of my creation is only just beginning." As he spoke, the floor continued to tremble and shake. More of the hulking monstrosities began to emerge from the gaping hole, their inhuman roars shaking the very foundations of the building. Jax weakly grasped the figure's arm, his eyes full of desperation. "You have to go," he rasped. "Save yourselves." But the figure shook their head, refusing to abandon their comrade. "We're not leaving you behind," they said firmly. Rachel stood her ground, as well, her expression hardening. "We'll fight them together," she declared. Seeing their resolve, Cole's expression darkened with fury. "No," he snarled, "you'll all die here." The mutants surged forward, and the trio braced themselves for the onslaught. But just as the zombies were about to strike, a blinding light filled the room, causing them all to shield their eyes. When the light faded, the figure and Rachel found themselves standing in the center of a sterile laboratory. The wounded Jax was beside them, and the monstrous zombies had vanished. Whirling around, they were stunned to see a group of scientists standing before them, one of them stepping forward with a grave expression. "We've been expecting you," she said quickly. "You're in grave danger. The zombie virus has mutated beyond anything we could have imagined. You must let us help you." Jax let out a weak cough, his eyes meeting the figures pleadingly. "They have to know the truth," he rasped, "about Cole and the source of the outbreak." The figure nodded, gripping his hand tightly. "Don't worry," they said, "we'll expose it all." As the scientist ushered them further into the lab, the figure and Rachel knew they were on the precipice of uncovering the full scope of the apocalyptic nightmare that had been unleashed upon the world. Cole's sinister machinations were only the beginning. There was an even darker truth that awaited them.